Hey guys, tonight we climb into a slender wooden canoe, its hull creaking softly as waves lap against the sides, and the horizon burns with the last traces of scarlet. The air is salty and warm, and the sea has begun to shift from glittering daylight blue to a velvety darkness. Above you, the first faint stars blink awake, tiny sparks against a sky that is about to become your only compass. You can almost feel the weight of history pressing on your shoulders because for centuries, this exact scene played out for Polynesian navigators who had no written maps, no metal compasses, and no GPS chirping in their pockets. They just had memory, chants, and constellations that never failed them. You, on the other hand, probably wouldn't last a single hour here. One wrong paddle stroke, and you'd be lost in what is basically the world's largest desert, only wetter, deeper, and considerably more shark-infested. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time down in the comments so we can all see who's drifting off together from different corners of the planet. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The canoe you're sitting in is long, narrow, and surprisingly sturdy. Built of hollowed tree trunks lashed with coconut fiber ropes, it feels delicate to modern eyes, but it has carried generations across thousands of miles. You crouch on the wooden planks, trying not to imagine splinters meeting your thighs, and realize the canoe has no steering wheel, no metal screws, nothing resembling the reassuring clunk of an engine. Instead, steering comes from a simple paddle, wielded by a helmsman who trusts his senses more than you trust Google Maps. The ocean around you hums with swells, and the wind pushes gently at your hair. You notice how silence falls naturally. Conversation isn't forbidden, but everyone knows their role. And at twilight, words give way to listening. A mainstream fact floats into your mind. Polynesian voyages settled virtually every habitable island in the Pacific, from Hawaii to New Zealand to Easter Island, covering distances that rivaled the voyages of Columbus centuries before him. Yet, unlike Columbus, they didn't rely on luck and drifting trade winds. They had a system, the quirky part. That system often began with what looked like stargazing poetry. The helmsman would start softly reciting chants, naming stars in sequence as they rose from the eastern horizon. Each star wasn't just a point of light, but a waypoint on a cosmic road map. And here's the debate scholars still argue over. Did navigators truly memorize hundreds of stars as precise bearings? Or did they work with broader clusters, relying more on the overall patterns of the sky? Either way, tonight, you're about to see why memory was their most prized possession. The sky darkens deeper, and more stars appear, one after another, until you almost feel dizzy staring upward. Your modern eyes want to connect dots into asterisms you learned as a kid. Orion's belt, maybe the Big Dipper. But Polynesian navigators had their own cultural constellations, each with a purpose. Where you see a random twinkle, they saw entire highways. You imagine your helmsman glancing upward, his lips moving slightly as he tracks where a star emerges, where it will cross overhead, and where it will sink into the horizon hours later. You think, how on earth does he remember all this? Then you realize he doesn't think in terms of north or east. He thinks in terms of when that star meets the horizon. Steer toward it. It's memory turned into direction. You shuffle uncomfortably in the canoe, because your modern brain insists you'd need a laminated cheat sheet to keep this straight. The helmsman, though, needs no cheat sheet. From childhood, he was taught to sit on beaches at night, staring until the stars etched themselves into his mind. Each chant was like a lullaby, but instead of soothing you to sleep, it planted knowledge you'd depend on when sleep wasn't an option. And yes, you wonder, did they ever mess it up? Of course, some voyages went disastrously wrong, but for the most part, this memory system worked so reliably that entire island networks thrived. You feel the canoe tilt slightly as the crew adjusts. They're young, muscular, and sun-darkened. Apprentices sit near their masters, absorbing every word, repeating names of stars under their breath. You try to whisper along, but it sounds like a toddler mangling the alphabet. Still, you can sense how repetition shapes the brain. And with every gentle rock of the canoe, you drift further into this world where the night sky isn't decoration, it's survival. The sea beneath you glows faintly with phosphorescent plankton. Every paddle stroke stirs a green shimmer as though the ocean itself wants to remind you it's alive. You glance upward again and see stars so bright they almost cast shadows. In your city back home, you barely notice 3 stars through the haze. Here, it feels like a planetarium cracked open and spilled across the heavens. The helmsman smiles faintly, amused at your open-mouthed awe. He knows you're just a tourist on this ride, a soft-skinned visitor. But he also knows that for his people, this isn't entertainment, it's inheritance. Historians still argue whether Polynesian sailors carried mental star maps spanning the entire Pacific, or if they learned narrower, region-specific routes stitched together voyage by voyage. What's clear is that tonight, as you sit in this canoe, you can almost feel how knowledge passed down becomes muscle memory. You've barely learned one star's name, and your brain is already overwhelmed. He has hundreds. It's humbling and honestly a little funny. You, the proud owner of a smartphone compass trying to memorize a sky. Spoiler, the stars win. The night grows deeper, and the canoe slices forward, the paddles in rhythm like a heartbeat. Around you, nothing but darkness and pinpricks of light. Yet for the helmsman, that's enough. The voyage has begun, and you're just along for the ride. The canoe glides further into open water, the shoreline behind you now a faint shadow swallowed by dusk, and you begin to notice something strange. The boat seems to sway with a rhythm you can't quite place. At first, you think it's just the waves, chaotic and unpredictable, but the helmsman nods knowingly as if he's hearing music you can't. You realize that, for Polynesian navigators, the ocean itself was a map. Every swell, every ripple, a clue pointing somewhere. The sea wasn't just a flat surface. It was textured, layered, whispering directions to those patient enough to listen. You lean over the edge, watching the water as it rises and falls in long, steady lines. These aren't random. They are the ocean's highways created by prevailing winds. A mainstream fact settles into your mind. Modern oceanographers have charted wave patterns and confirmed what navigators knew centuries ago, that swells can travel thousands of miles across the Pacific, maintaining direction long after their storm of origin has passed. To you, it looks like endless rocking, but to a navigator, it's a steady signal, like a compass needle hidden under the waves. Here comes the quirky tidbit. Some master navigators claim they could feel swells not just with their eyes, but with their bodies. By lying flat in the canoe, their backs against the wood, they sensed subtle shifts in vibration that revealed a change in current. You imagine yourself lying there trying to concentrate, but all you'd register would be, "Yep, still getting seasick." Meanwhile, the helmsman reads the ocean like you'd scroll through a text thread. Scholars still argue whether this bodily sensitivity was trained skill or exaggerated legend. Did navigators genuinely sense long-wave swells through bone and muscle, or did they rely more on visual clues? Either way, you have to admit the idea of using your spine as a GPS antenna is oddly fascinating. The crew shifts, paddles, slicing the water in unison, and you begin to feel how the boat rides differently depending on the swell. From the east, a long rolling push nudges you gently. From the south, a cross swell cuts across, making the canoe twitch. The helmsman keeps track, silently noting. The dominant swell comes from here, the secondary swell from there, and when both align, they point toward land hundreds of miles away. To him, this information is so clear it might as well be a neon sign. To you, it's invisible. One of the apprentices chuckles at your furrowed brow. He dips a hand into the water and points toward the horizon where the swell originates. You squint, but see nothing but darkness. He shakes his head, smiling as if to say, "Give it a decade or two and maybe you'll get it." For him, growing up around elders who narrated every shift of the sea, the knowledge has seeped into memory as naturally as your childhood habit of memorizing TV jingles. You can't help but wonder, how often did this method fail? Imagine relying on invisible waves in a stormy night. The helmsman answers with a shrug. Failure was always possible, but layered signals made the method robust. You didn't just read swells. You paired them with stars, birds, clouds, and other cues. Navigation wasn't one skill. It was a whole orchestra, and swells provided the bass line. As the night deepens, the ocean takes on a hypnotic rhythm. The canoe rises and falls, until you almost feel lulled into a trance. This was part of the genius. The more you immersed yourself, the more your body internalized the pattern. You feel your muscles unconsciously adjusting, swaying with the boat, almost as if they too want to learn. And maybe, if you spent enough nights like this, you'd start to pick it up, not as words in your head, but as instinct in your bones. The helmsman breaks the silence with a half smile, pointing toward the horizon. He murmurs a phrase in his language, identifying the swell, its direction, and the storm that gave it birth far across the sea. You can't help but grin, imagining if you tried to tell your friends back home, "Yeah, I rode a canoe, and a guy told me the name of a wave." They'd laugh, but here, it's as serious as knowing your street address. Historians still argue whether navigators had a formalized swell compass comparable to the star compass, or if swell reading was more improvisational. Some accounts describe rigid training with set terms. Others suggest it was looser, guided by experience. Either way, the skill was real enough that modern experiments, where Pacific Islanders navigated without instruments, have proven successful. That's humbling, because with all your weather apps and radar, you'd still panic the moment your phone battery dipped below 10%. You glance down, half expecting to see an arrow painted on the canoe pointing this way to Tahiti. Instead, there's just water, endless and unmarked. Yet to the navigator, it's crowded with signals, like standing on a busy street where you somehow can't hear the cars. You laugh softly at yourself. Tonight, you are the most clueless passenger in history's most sophisticated Uber. And so, The canoe presses on, the ocean beneath not an enemy, but a guide, every swell carrying whispers of direction. You're beginning to see that without maps, Polynesian voyagers didn't sail blind. They sailed listening. The star compass, a way to turn the entire sky into a steering wheel you hold in your head. You sit on the thwarts, knees braced, and feel the canoe breathing with the swells while your eyes climb to the horizon. The helmsman tells you softly to stop thinking of north, south, east, and west as letters on a schoolroom poster. Instead, think of the horizon as a necklace of many small houses. Each house is where a particular star rises or sets. Keep a star in its house, and your canoe keeps its heading. Let it drift, and you drift. Simple, until you remember the houses are invisible and the ceiling is made of galaxies. Your planetarium app would rage quit in protest. He traces with his finger, not pointing exactly because pointing at stars can be taboo, an arc where a bright star will rise. That place on the horizon has a name, and the star has one too, and their pairing is like an address. You practice in a whisper, star, house, direction, again and again. The rhythm feels like paddling, and that is exactly the point. The compass is not something you read, it's something you perform. A mainstream fact steadies you. Many Pacific wayfinding traditions divide the horizon into dozens of sectors, often taught today as 32 houses, so that each known star has a rising and setting position used for steering. In the tropics, those stars sweep predictable paths. The navigator memorizes where they appear in sequence through the night. Keep the bow aimed so that a selected star rises from its house and you travel a steady course. In clouds, you switch to another star laterally or wait for the sky to clear, holding the swell alignment you learned last night. The system is layered like those swells you've begun to feel in your bones. The helmsman offers a chant. It sounds like a lullaby carved into steps. Each line names a star in the order it rises tonight, east to west, low to high. You repeat the lines with him, letting the names click into the chain of houses that ring the horizon. The chant carries a practical joke at your expense. He slips a teasing note about the visitor who still thinks north is up, and the crew chuckles quietly. You grin, because, yes, your brain still wants the sky to act like your phone's compass. Out here, up and down are not the point. Rising and setting are. Quirky tidbit time. Apprentices sometimes practice by kneeling on the beach before dawn and drawing a giant compass with their hands, spokes radiating from their knees to the waterline. As stars winked out in the brightening sky, they would point their bodies toward where each had risen, murmuring the houses until the pattern felt as natural as standing. You try a tiny version on the canoe, mapping the rim of the world with your toes. It's awkward, granted, but you can sense how, with years of repetition, your body would become the diagram. The helmsman talks of setting stars, too, because steering by the west is just as useful. Your task is to keep a chosen star sinking toward a known house just off the stern line. If wind or current push you, the star drifts left or right. You correct until it returns to its lane. When a steering star climbs too high or dips, you pass the baton to the next member of its family. You think of it like relay runners exchanging a torch around the horizon. Your only previous relay experience involved passing snacks on the couch, but you keep that to yourself. Moonlight spills over the water, and you ask if the moon ruins the star show. The helmsman shrugs, bright, yes, but the star families and their houses are stubbornly dependable. Besides, the moon itself carries clues. Its path traces the ecliptic, reminding you where the sun and many planets travel, and its reflection on water can reveal subtle surface texture when stars hide. Layered signals again, nothing works alone. Cloud banks thicken, and for a few minutes the sky erases its chalkboard. The boat does not panic. You feel how the crew leans into the swells you met last section, holding a line by touch until a gap opens and the stars peek through. Then, click, you're back on the house you want. It's like slipping a key into a lock in the dark because your fingers remember the shape. You risk one last question. How long until a student truly has the compass? The helmsman smiles. Years, night after night. Voyages that braid memory to salt and wind till the sky no longer feels above you, it feels around you. Then he adds a soft assurance. The compass isn't memorized once. It's refreshed every night you look up. You decide to keep looking. You might never master it, but you can at least become the kind of person who knows which star is rising where you live. That thought makes you oddly proud. The chant resumes, so quiet it blends with the hush of water on wood. Rising houses pass their torches to setting houses. The canoe holds its course. Your eyelids dip and lift with the rhythm. Somewhere overhead, a bright star hits its mark on the horizon, and the boat, obedient to a memory older than maps, slides forward into the dark. As the canoe rides steady, another layer slips in. Rhythm keeps you awake. Out on the ocean, nights are long, dark, and monotonous. Fatigue is dangerous. A chant's pulse works like caffeine. It reminds you to stay alert, to mark each star's rise. You hum a little louder this time, mostly to keep your mind sharp, though you know you sound like a kazoo stuck in a jar. That's joke 2, and the apprentices are kind enough not to say it out loud. The debate about chants returns in your head. Were they truly precise, enough to cross thousands of miles, or were they mnemonic scaffolds, rough guides that trained memory but required improvisation once underway? The helmsman would probably shrug and tell you the answer is irrelevant. What matters is that the song kept generations alive, moving from island to island like stepping stones across the Pacific. Moonlight slides across the water, silvering the canoe's edge. You notice how the apprentices now take turns leading a verse. It's call and response. One sings a star name, another echoes, and the rest hum. You think of it like karaoke, except with way higher stakes. Forget the lyrics here, and you don't just lose points. You might lose the island. And then comes the light joke woven into their verse. One apprentice slips in a line about the foreign guest who thinks stars are sheep, and everyone chuckles again. You sigh dramatically, giving them a theatrical bow from your cramped seat. Joke 3 delivered, everyone smiles, and the song goes on. Your body begins to sway with the rhythm, your eyelids heavier than before. You realize how hypnotic this system is meant to be. Not only does it encode knowledge, it settles your breathing, keeps you calm, makes you part of something larger. You could almost forget the vast emptiness surrounding you, the endless water waiting to swallow any mistake. Instead, you feel strangely safe, as if the song itself builds a protective circle around the canoe. When the last verse trails off, silence returns, but the silence is full. You look upward again, and for a moment the stars seem to hum back. The memory of the chant lingers, carrying each star to its place. You may never master it, but tonight you understand why music became the most reliable notebook in the Pacific. The night deepens, And now your attention shifts away from the chant toward the small crew huddled around you. These young apprentices are not just passengers. They are living hard drives, slowly loading data with every voyage. You notice how they lean closer to the helmsman when he whispers, how their eyes follow his every motion, and how their hands twitch as if copying an invisible paddle stroke. In this world, training isn't done with classrooms or textbooks. It's done through apprenticeship, repetition, and a lot of sitting in small boats while trying not to nod off. A mainstream fact comes to mind. Polynesian navigation knowledge was traditionally passed down within families or guild-like groups, with long apprenticeships stretching for years. Young trainees often spent night after night memorizing star paths, swells, and chants until the information became second nature. This wasn't casual dabbling. It was a commitment that shaped your life's purpose. Imagine signing up for a job that required you to literally risk drifting off the edge of the world if you didn't study hard enough. Not exactly the kind of internship you'd find on LinkedIn. And then the quirky tidbit. In some communities, an apprentice navigator was deliberately kept awake through long voyages, sometimes teased mercilessly by elders to make sure he didn't miss star positions. One tale even tells of apprentices being splashed with seawater if they started nodding off. Think of it as the Pacific version of an espresso shot, except delivered by a grinning uncle with a bucket. You look at the youngest crew member now, his eyes drooping, and sure enough, one of the older men flicks a handful of water his way. He startles, then laughs sheepishly. Tradition alive in real time, historians still argue whether these apprenticeships were rigidly hierarchical, reserved only for chiefs' families, or more widely accessible to talented commoners. Some evidence suggests elite restriction. Other accounts hint at more egalitarian teaching, depending on the island. The debate hangs in the salty air, but the apprentices don't seem bothered. They're too busy whispering their chants and copying their master's gaze toward the horizon. You notice how much learning happens silently. The apprentices don't interrupt with constant questions. Instead, they mimic body language, repeat chants under their breath, and glance where the helmsman glances. You realize this isn't about cramming for a test. It's about molding your senses until you stop thinking and start feeling. You can sense their pride in being trusted to sit here, even if their main task tonight is simply watching. The helmsman shifts position, handing his paddle to a trainee for a few minutes. The canoe doesn't veer wildly, but you feel a slight wobble as the boy overcompensates. The others murmur corrections, soft but firm, guiding him back on track. You catch yourself holding your breath, almost like a nervous parent watching a teenager merge onto the freeway. Eventually, the wobble smooths and the boat settles again. Everyone nods, satisfied. The boy exhales in relief, his grin wide in the moonlight. Joke one for this section comes from an older crewman who mutters something that clearly translates to, "Don't quit your day job," and the others chuckle. A pot is pulled from under the canoe's planks. Nothing fancy, just dried fish wrapped in leaves and shared around. Apprentices chew while still muttering star names between bites, like students sneaking flashcards at dinner. You try a piece, salty and chewy, and nearly choke when one of the crew laughs at your expression. Joke two, courtesy of your taste buds. You think about how unusual this learning environment feels compared to your world. No whiteboards, no exams, no grades, just endless nights at sea. knowledge dripped slowly into your bones, and somehow that drip builds an entire ocean-spanning civilization. The thought makes you oddly jealous. The helmsman clears his throat and begins a story, half instructional, half entertaining. He tells of a voyage where a young apprentice misremembered a chant and steered slightly wrong, missing land by dozens of miles. The crew nearly starved before correcting course. The moral isn't harsh. It's told with humor, even tenderness, but the lesson is clear. Memory matters. As he finishes, one apprentice adds, "At least he didn't hit Australia by mistake." And the crew laughs softly. That's joke 3, and even you chuckle at the understatement. The canoe rocks steadily, and you notice how the apprentices begin to sink not just in chant, but in body rhythm. When the helmsman shifts, they shift. When he hums, they hum. It's as though their bodies are being tuned like instruments. You sense how, over years, this tuning will create navigators who no longer copy. They'll become the rhythm themselves. Historians still argue whether Polynesian training systems were formalized schools or more fluid household traditions. Some say the knowledge was jealously guarded. Others say it spread widely through inter-island exchanges. Either way, sitting in this canoe, you can tell it's both strict and playful. Serious enough to keep people alive, flexible enough to weave in jokes and snacks. The helmsman finally resumes control of the paddle, the canoe straightens, and the apprentices settle back into their watch. You glance upward, stars spinning across the horizon like points on a chalkboard, and realize that for these young men, every night is a lesson, every mile a test. And the ocean is their teacher, stern and endlessly patient. The canoe glides smoothly, and now your attention shifts to how navigators connect stars not just as a pretty ceiling, but as direct highways to islands. It's like each point of light isn't just a twinkle, but a landmark, and together they outline invisible runways stretched across the sea. You lean back and feel how strange this is, a sailor pointing toward nothing but darkness, and yet claiming with absolute certainty, "Follow this star line, and you'll find land." A mainstream fact lands in your thoughts. Polynesian navigators used rising and setting stars as beacons that aligned with specific islands. For example, a star might rise from a horizon point that lines up with Tahiti, then set at another that aligns with Hawaii. Holding the canoe steady on that star meant you were literally riding a corridor of light toward land hundreds of miles away. No charts, no compass, just faith in the repeatability of the sky. Then comes a quirky tidbit. Some navigators named their star lines after foods like breadfruit or taro, so apprentices remembered that to reach the breadfruit island, follow the breadfruit star line. Imagine if your GPS told you, in half a mile, turn left at the Taco Bell constellation. You can't help but grin, picturing an entire fast food chain glowing above you, guiding your midnight cravings. Historians still argue whether navigators thought of these star lines as strict, mathematical bearings or as more flexible corridors of travel. Some evidence suggests precise angular memorization. Other scholars think navigators allowed generous margins, trusting to swell patterns and bird sightings to refine their accuracy. Either way, the principle worked because island after island was found and settled. The helmsman gestures toward a brilliant star just rising. He murmurs its name, then names an island. He doesn't say if you'll reach it, he says when. The apprentices nod solemnly. You realize that for them, Stars aren't metaphors or decorations. They're directions as concrete as street signs back home. The crew begins a soft call and response, each voice linking a star to a destination. You hear Hawaii, Rarotonga, Samoa, names rippling through the night like prayer. It strikes you that this is both geography and family tree. Each island is not just a spot of land, but a home of cousins, trade partners, or rivals. By memorizing star paths, the apprentices are also memorizing the network of their world. One apprentice leans toward you, whispering with a grin, "That star line? It goes to a place with the best coconuts." You chuckle. Joke one delivered, travel review included. The canoe tilts slightly as the helmsman adjusts to keep the star aligned with the bow. The motion is subtle, but everyone feels it, like the boat itself is listening to the night. You wonder how often this system failed. What if clouds blocked the view for days? The helmsman shrugs when you ask, smiling patiently. Then he points to the swells, then to the flight of a seabird, then back to the sky. Redundancy, he implies, always redundancy. You recall another quirky note. Some islands were said to be invisible during certain seasons because no reliable star line pointed directly toward them. Navigators would then sail sideways, holding parallel to another line until a cloud column or bird flight betrayed land. It sounds risky, but somehow it worked. Civilizations thrived, and you're sitting here proof that it worked often enough. The apprentices whisper more verses, this time mixing practical and poetic imagery. A star becomes a torch. An island becomes a sleeping giant. A line becomes a canoe road. You close your eyes and picture those metaphors. Landmarks made not of rock, but of imagination. And it dawns on you that imagination itself is a navigational tool. When you can't carry maps, you carry stories that make the invisible visible. Another laugh breaks out when a young apprentice mutters a verse comparing one star line to a lazy pig. Everyone chuckles, including you. Joke 2. You're slowly learning the rhythm. Humor keeps memory alive, keeps the boat awake. Historians still debate whether every navigator memorized the same universal map or whether each community customized star lines for its own local islands. The truth may be both, broad shared knowledge with localized tweaks. That debate doesn't matter in this moment because the canoe presses on and the star before you shines with a confidence that silences doubt. The helmsman finally hands over the chant to an apprentice. The boy stumbles once, then recovers, his voice growing steadier. The stars above seem to approve. You think, this is a test, not of courage, not of muscle, but of memory under pressure. Fail here, and the canoe drifts. Succeed, and the road of light holds steady. One apprentice nudges you playfully, saying, "Careful, if you blink too long, you'll lose the island." That's joke 3, and you laugh nervously because he's right. Close your eyes for too long, and the ocean erases everything but stars. The night stretches, stars crossing their houses, each one a waypoint toward land you cannot yet see. And yet, sitting in this canoe, you realize the land is already here, not under your feet, not yet, but carried in memory, charted in starlight, and sung into being by voices that refuse to forget. The horizon darkens even further, and your eyes drift from the heavens back to the water. The canoe hums along, guided by starlight, but you begin to notice how much else the crew observes beyond the stars. The ocean isn't silent. It has a voice, and Polynesian navigators learn to listen with the whole body. Tonight, you're about to witness how birds, clouds, and even stray pieces of driftwood become part of the same navigational toolkit. A mainstream fact steadies you. Seabirds, like frigate birds and terns, rarely sleep on the water and usually return to land by nightfall. Spotting them in the morning or evening gives away the direction of nearby islands. You glance up and, sure enough, see a dark shape flapping low, headed purposefully toward the west. To you, it's just a bird on its commute. To the helmsman, it's confirmation that the star line he's holding leads somewhere solid. Then the quirky tidbit drifts your way. Navigators sometimes studied cloud formations that lingered above islands, especially in otherwise empty horizons. Certain islands forced warm, moist air upward, forming puffy, stationary clouds that betrayed land tens of miles before it became visible. Imagine being in the middle of nowhere, spotting a single cloud that refuses to move and knowing that's your beacon. You can't help but smile. Your weather app could never. Historians still argue whether navigators relied more heavily on these environmental clues or if they were secondary to the star compass. Some suggest these signs were backup measures. Others argue they were equally important, especially on cloudy nights. Sitting here, you see the debate in action. The helmsman glances at the bird, then at the star, then at the swell beneath his hand. He's not choosing one method, he's layering them all. One apprentice nudges you and whispers with a grin, "That bird!" He knows where the best fish market is. You chuckle, joke one lands, salty and light as the breeze. The canoe rocks slightly as the helmsman points toward a faint smear on the horizon. At first, you think it's just fog, but the apprentices murmur the word for island cloud. They nod to each other, reassured. You're stunned. To your eyes, it's practically nothing, but to them it's as clear as a lighthouse. A scrap of driftwood bumps gently against the canoe. The youngest apprentice scoops it up, inspects it, and sniffs the damp bark. He murmurs something about its origin, then tosses it aside. You laugh inwardly, driftwood sniffing as navigation. But then you remember, certain trees only grow on certain islands. If that wood has floated far, it's like a postcard from land. You consider joking about writing "Wish you were here" on it, but you keep quiet. Another apprentice decides to lighten the mood anyway, tossing a pebble-sized shell at your lap. Gift from the island we're not at yet. He smirks. Joke too. Everyone chuckles softly, and you realize how humor greases the wheels of these long, silent nights. You watch as the crew balances attention between sky and sea. A flock of birds passes overhead, their wings catching starlight. The apprentices whisper about the distance. These birds usually don't fly more than 30 miles from land. Combined with the stationary cloud, it becomes a double signal. Even you, the clueless passenger, can tell now there must be an island out there. Historians still debate whether navigators actively tracked multiple bird species or if they simply relied on general patterns of flight. Some records suggest encyclopedic bird knowledge. Others imply a more intuitive awareness. Either way, you realize these navigators were part ornithologist, part meteorologist, part poet, and part endurance athlete. Try fitting that on a resume. The helmsman lets the apprentices lead now, asking them to describe what they see. They call out, "Cloud, bird, swell from the east." Their voices are soft but steady. You imagine how terrifying it would be to make a mistake. Misjudge a cloud, follow the wrong bird, mistake random debris for driftwood from the wrong island. One apprentice grins and points at you. Maybe our guests can ask the plankton for directions. Everyone chuckles. Joke 3. You pretend to lean over and interrogate the glowing flecks, which earns a louder laugh. As the canoe presses forward, you see how these layers form a safety net. Stars are the backbone, but birds, clouds, and driftwood fill in the gaps. It's redundancy disguised as magic. You shake your head, half in disbelief, half in admiration. The night air grows cooler, but the ocean feels more alive, not less. Every ripple, every shadow carries a message, and every pair of eyes in the canoe is trained to read it. You realize that in this world, nothing is random. Every bird flight, every cloud puff, every scrap of floating wood is a clue, waiting for someone awake enough to notice. And that, more than any map, is what keeps these canoes on course. The stars wheel on overhead, but now the helmsman begins to speak in a softer, almost reverent tone. His words are not only about swells and constellations, but about gods, myths, and the sacred trust that clings to navigation like salt on skin. You lean closer, realizing that for these voyagers, sailing was not just science, it was ceremony. Every voyage carried weight beyond the practical. It was a thread tying the people to their ancestors and to the gods themselves. A mainstream fact anchors you. In many Polynesian societies, navigators were considered priests of the sea, entrusted with sacred knowledge that was passed through rituals as much as through chants. Their role wasn't only technical, it was spiritual. When a navigator pointed the canoe into the night, he carried the responsibility of generations, believed to channel ancestral wisdom from those who had sailed before. And here's the quirky tidbit. Some navigators claim to commune with spirit guides, sometimes even specific animals or mythic figures, who whispered directions during moments of doubt. Imagine sitting in a canoe and telling the crew, "Don't worry, the turtle god says we're on the right path." In your world, that would get you strange looks. Here, it sealed trust. Historians still argue whether these ritual elements were essential components of navigation or if they were layered atop practical skill as cultural framing. Some scholars think navigators genuinely believed the gods dictated success. Others see the rituals as a way to enforce discipline and hierarchy. The debate lingers, but on this canoe, you can feel how faith and science blur until they are inseparable. The helmsman's chant grows more formal now, almost like prayer. Apprentices bow their heads slightly, echoing the words with careful respect. You sense that this is more than a classroom, it is a temple afloat on the sea. You try lowering your head too, and one apprentice gives you an approving nod. Joke 1 arrives when another whispers, "Careful, bow too low and you'll fall out." The canoe rocks gently and everyone smiles. Stories flow between the chants. You hear of Maui, the trickster demigod who fished up islands with his magical hook. You hear of ancestors who followed birds across impossible distances, guided by dreams as much as by swells. These myths are not distractions, they are frameworks. They remind the apprentices that their skill is not only for catching fish or finding land, but for fulfilling a cosmic responsibility. To fail isn't just a navigational error, it's a rupture with the ancestors. The youngest apprentice whispers a verse about a goddess who carries the stars in her cloak. The others laugh softly, and he blushes. You don't know if the humor comes from his delivery or from his youthful seriousness. Either way, you sense how mythology seeps into memory. Characters become mnemonics. Rituals become anchors. It's harder to forget a star. when you think of it as a goddess hiding it in her cloak. The helmsman sprinkles water into the sea, a tiny gesture of offering. He murmurs words you don't catch, but the tone is clear. Gratitude. Out here, you depend on forces you can't control. Offering thanks is less superstition and more humility. You nod, thinking about your own world where you rarely thank the traffic lights for turning green. Joke 2 sneaks into your mind, and you whisper it. Maybe I should start pouring coffee on the road as an offering. One apprentice hears, chuckles, and translates. The others laugh with you. Historians still debate whether such offerings were standardized rituals or improvised acts of devotion. Some sources describe elaborate pre-voyage ceremonies. Others suggest simple gestures at sea. Either way, what matters is the atmosphere it creates, a sense of being part of something larger, a reminder that you don't travel alone. The apprentices take turns retelling myths as the night stretches. One tells a story of a star that once got lost and had to be guided back by the moon. Another imagines an ancestor who argued with a wave until both agreed on the best direction. These are funny, even absurd, but also sticky. Mnemonics disguised as myth. You laugh with them, joke 3 for the night, when someone points at you and says, "Our guest is like that lost star, needs guiding back." You realize that in this world, the line between story and instruction is blurred. You don't just memorize positions, you memorize personalities. A star becomes a trickster, a wave becomes a stubborn uncle, a cloud becomes a shy cousin. And suddenly the night sky is no longer overwhelming. It's a family reunion. The canoe presses on, surrounded by darkness and salt spray, but you feel strangely comforted. Because when the helmsman chants to the gods and the apprentices laugh at myths, they're not just filling silence, they're binding themselves to memory, to ancestry, and to each other. And in that bond lies the secret of why they never needed maps. The night grows heavier, and the air feels damp with salt. You notice a quiet tension settling among the apprentices. Up until now, chants and myths have flowed easily, but the helmsman shifts the mood with a subtle glance. His voice lowers, steady but weighty, as he reminds the crew of what happens if memory slips. Out here, the ocean doesn't forgive mistakes. Forgetting a single verse, misplacing a star, or confusing one bird flight for another could mean days of drifting. And days of drifting could mean running short on water, short on food, and long on regret. You swallow hard, suddenly aware that this entire system rests on fragile memory. He has you rehearse a steering sequence, a run of rising stars that should carry the canoe across an invisible lane of water. You try to hold the order in your head, but one name smudges into the next, like chalk in rain. The helmsman makes a tiny course correction with the paddle, and the boat gently obeys. But you feel the treacherous truth. A mistake at the mouth of a voyage is small, yet the farther you sail, the wider the error spreads. It's like walking through a doorway at a slight angle and discovering 100 miles later you've arrived at the wrong island. You briefly dream of a pleasant robotic voice saying, "Recalculating," but no such luck out here. A mainstream fact steadies your nerves. Archaeological and linguistic evidence overwhelmingly supports that Pacific settlement was largely deliberate. Double-hulled or outrigger canoes carried people, crops, and animals across vast distances again and again. That kind of repeatable success implies robust safeguards against forgetting. The apprentices nod when the helmsman lists them: redundancy in the sky, families of stars rising in nearly the same houses, redundancy on the water, swell patterns that confirm headings, and redundancy in memory, chants, songs, and stories. You're basically riding inside a floating backup system. If one layer blinks, another takes over. But redundancy doesn't erase peril. The helmsman tells a cautionary tale in a tone that's half bedtime story, half warning label. A navigator, too proud to admit he'd lost the thread of a chant, held to the wrong star as clouds hid the rest. The canoe slid off its intended line. By dawn, they were far from the seabirds' commuting routes, the water casks lower than planned. They survived only because a morning island cloud betrayed land on the horizon. The crew laughed about it later. Humor is how you file fear in a safe drawer. But the moral lodged like a splinter. Pride can be as dangerous as a storm. To keep pride in check, training courts discomfort on purpose. The apprentices rotate star watches through the small hours when the world wants to go blurry. The helmsman quizzes them mid-yawn. Which house will that star give to its cousin after midnight? Because memory must function when eyelids are heavy. You empathize. Your own brain-spinning beach ball has appeared more than once tonight. An older crewman grins at you and whispers, "Don't worry, if you forget, we'll just ask the plankton." Joke one lands, familiar and kind, and even the helmsman's mouth twitches. A quirky tidbit glints in the moonlight. On shore, some navigators use teaching aids made of sticks and shells to model how swells cross and reflect. Fragile charts that never went to sea but trained eyes and memory before a voyage. You hold one in your mind, threads marking swell corridors, shells for atolls, the whole thing light as a spider web. The helmsman says that once you've internalized the pattern, you leave the web behind and sail with only what's in your head. It's a reminder that any physical prop is temporary. The true chart must be portable inside your skull. You ask the question that has been nibbling at you. What happens if the chant truly slips? If clouds sit for 3 nights and the swells grow muddled and the birds don't show? The helmsman answers with a sequence calm enough to slow your breathing. Shorten the sail and conserve energy. Hold a conservative heading that keeps the dominant swell slightly on your quarter, the same angle you memorized at dusk. Note sunrise and sunset to regain east-west sense. At dawn and dusk, scan for commuting birds. Drink sparingly. Wait for one clean sign, a break in cloud, a stationary cloud column, or a flock returning to land. The ocean, he says, rewards patience more than panic. You nod, putting "don't panic" on a mental sticky note next to "don't fall out" when bowing. Still, the apprentices have to rehearse the worst case because real voyages don't grade on a curve. One recites the protocol if a steering star vanishes. Slide to its sibling in the same house, then to the next family if clouds close that door too. Another demonstrates how to feel for the older swell underneath the messy surface waves lying flat, letting the ribcage perceive the slower, longer pulse. You try it. At first, all you feel is your own heartbeat. Then faintly, a long, sure thump beneath the short chop, like a drum down the hall. You grin, half from discovery, half from relief that you felt anything at all. An apprentice nods and says, "See, even the guest's bones can learn." Joke 2 touches down, warm as shared tea. The helmsman turns philosophical. Memory, he says, is not a warehouse you fill once. It's a garden you weed and water nightly. Miss a night and the paths grow fuzzy. Miss a week and the weeds win. His point isn't scolding, it's maintenance. Earlier, when you poured imaginary coffee on asphalt as an offering, you were joking. Here, offerings are real. Time, attention, discipline. The chant is not paperwork, it's life support. A debate breeze passes over the gunwale. Historians still argue whether accidental drift voyages played a significant role in discovery compared to planned exploration. Some cite tales of canoes blown far from home. Others point to the systematic transport of staple crops and animals as evidence of intention. On this canoe, the apprentices hear the debate and shrug toward the rigging. Planned or not, the way you survive either scenario is the same. Remember better than the ocean forgets you. Fatigue is the real enemy, so the crew uses small tricks. One apprentice pinches the soft skin between thumb and finger when his focus wavers. Another murmurs a nonsense couplet about a lazy pig-star until he snorts at himself, awake. The helmsman quietly swaps people's places for a few minutes to reset posture and sight lines. And yes, sometimes a quick splash of seawater in the face does the job. Espresso, Pacific Edition. When a droplet lands on your nose, you sneeze, and the boat snickers gently. Joke 3 checks in, briny and effective. A practical, unromantic fact returns. Water and food are rationed to account for detours. Gourd containers and later wooden casks are sealed carefully. Taro and breadfruit are portioned. Fish lines trail because fresh protein buys time. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic, just the math of survival. Forgetting stretches those numbers in the wrong direction, so discipline around provisions is another hedge against human error. Silence settles again, but it feels purposeful, not fearful. You listen the way you were taught. To the sky for the next rising star, to the hull for the older swell whispering true beneath confusion, to the air for the winged beats of birds returning to land. A faint smudge of cloud holds its ground on the horizon, the same way it did back in Section 7, and the apprentices share a look that says, "There." The helmsman doesn't smile yet. He waits for a second sign. Moments later, a dark bird lifts off the water and angles toward that smudge. Two signals make a line. The line becomes confidence. Confidence becomes a small adjustment of the paddle. You exhale, not because danger has passed forever, but because you finally understand the contract everyone in this canoe signed. You don't eliminate forgetting. You plan for it, you practice for it, and you surround it with enough overlapping clues that when memory blinks, the ocean doesn't get the last word. The chant resumes, soft, steady, stubborn, and you add your whisper to the end of each line, not because you know it perfectly, but because you want to keep the garden weeded until morning. The sky begins to fade toward the pale edge of dawn, and the canoe is still slicing forward, steady as a needle stitching invisible fabric. You can sense a shift in tone from the helmsman, almost as if he's inviting you into a larger conversation, not just how the stars work, but where this whole system came from. And here's where the ocean suddenly grows bigger than the canoe, because Polynesia is part of a vast Pacific, and other island groups, Micronesia, Melanesia, developed their own traditions. Were the methods identical, borrowed, parallel inventions? Historians still argue, sometimes fiercely, about who first shaped the star compass and whether knowledge radiated outward or flowered in multiple places at once. A mainstream fact eases you into this debate. Micronesian navigators, particularly from the Caroline Islands, maintained some of the most detailed star compass traditions, such as those preserved in Satawal. In those islands, teaching aids made of sticks and shells mapped swells, islands, and reference points. European sailors who first saw these stick charts in the 19th century were stunned. They looked abstract, even incomprehensible, but they encoded oceanic patterns with precision. Polynesian voyagers, meanwhile, had carried whole families and crops across thousands of miles to Hawaii, New Zealand, and Easter Island centuries earlier, using oral knowledge. Both systems existed, both worked, and both claim roots in even older Lapita seafarers, who began spreading eastward 3,000 years ago. Then comes a quirky tidbit. Some accounts describe Micronesian navigators referring to stars as sailing companions, almost like friendly passengers who shared the voyage. You smile at the idea of Orion pulling up a seat in the canoe, cracking jokes while you paddle. One apprentice mutters that you should offer him fish if he shows up, and everyone laughs. Joke one delivered, myth and humor braided together. The helmsman explains how scholars argue about chronology. Did the people of the Carolinas refine swells and star houses first, passing fragments of knowledge south and east? Or did Polynesians, spreading further into open water, build on shared Lapita foundations in their own way? Some claim the similarities prove a single origin. Others point to differences as evidence of independent development. You sit there realizing that even today, with satellite maps and radiocarbon dates, the debate is alive. What's certain is that no single canoe invented it all in one night. Knowledge flowed, blended, diverged, and was rebraided. You picture the scene 1,000 years ago, two canoes meeting on an atoll beach, crews trading shell necklaces and dried fish, while navigators swap chants under the stars. A child listening nearby picks up a verse he'll teach to his grandson. This is how science moves when it isn't written down. It moves like gossip, like melody, like laughter on the wind. One apprentice, clearly enjoying himself, points at you and says, "Maybe our guest will take the chant back to his island." Everyone chuckles at the absurdity of you fumbling through verses, but the image lingers. Knowledge never stays still. Joke 2 lands smoothly. The helmsman grows quiet for a moment and gestures broadly across the horizon. "This is one ocean," he says, voice low. "Not many seas, not divided waters, but one ocean with many names." To him, Micronesia, Melanesia, Polynesia are not boundaries, but threads in the same net. You realize how artificial your urge is to categorize origins, as if one region can claim ownership. To sailors who lived it, the important truth was that the sky and the sea kept giving, no matter who first noticed. A quirky note slides in. European observers often misunderstood. They saw islanders reach new lands and assumed it was accident, drift, luck. They dismissed chance as superstition. Only much later did experiments prove deliberate long-distance voyages could be repeated without instruments. You sigh, imagining the navigators of the past rolling their eyes if they heard someone call their achievements accidents. Joke 3 writes itself. You imagine the helmsman leaning over to Columbus, whispering, "Nice guesswork, but we've been Ubering across the Pacific for centuries." The canoe laughs softly when you mutter it. Historians still argue whether cultural pride today sometimes back projects too much systemization onto what may have been flexible, situational practice. Was there truly a neat 32-point compass in every canoe? Or were these codified later to preserve something that was always more fluid? The debate itself becomes part of the living tradition. On this canoe, the apprentices seem uninterested in resolving it. They are content to chant, watch swells, and laugh. The horizon brightens, faint orange peeling the edge of the sea. Birds streak overhead, returning to their islands. Clouds pile above distant land. The helmsman doesn't declare victory, he never does, but you feel the confidence settle deeper. Origins may be argued in books, but on the water, what matters is that the knowledge works. It carried Lapita pottery eastward, carried Polynesians into remote corners, carried Micronesians between low coral atolls. And tonight, it carried you into the middle of a debate that still refuses to sleep. You lean back, letting your eyelids droop, and imagine the voices of navigators from different regions joining into a single chant. No one owns the stars. No one owns the swells. The ocean doesn't care where the method began. It only rewards those who remember. The first glow of morning has passed, and now the canoe is deep in its routine. You've heard the chants, the myths, the debates. But what about the everyday? After all, a voyage across hundreds of miles isn't only about starlight and destiny. It's also about people stuck together on a narrow deck, day after day, night after night, sharing food, space, laughter, and fatigue. You settle into the rhythm of a nightly routine on the canoe, discovering how crews manage to stay human while pretending to be celestial calculators. A mainstream fact steadies your imagination. Double-hulled and outrigger canoes could hold not just navigators and crew, but also provisions, taro, breadfruit, coconuts, gourds of fresh water, even pigs or chickens for long voyages. Meals were rationed carefully, often eaten in silence or accompanied by soft talk, because energy conservation mattered. You watch as dried fish is passed around again, and this time you chew slowly, trying not to wince at the salt. Everyone smirks at your expression. Apparently, you're predictable. Joke one delivered, as salty as the fish itself. The helmsman assigns watches in rotating shifts. 2 apprentices keep eyes on the sky. 2 manage sails and paddles, while others rest. You notice there is no single moment when the canoe is unguarded. Someone is always awake, always listening. You compare it to your world where, even on long road trips, people doze off, trust in autopilot. Here, autopilot is a human with burning eyes and a chant in his mouth. The quirky tidbit. Sometimes crews use lullabies, not to sleep but to stay awake. They'd hum repetitive, droning tunes that irritated fatigue just enough to keep minds alert. You chuckle, thinking of it as the ancient version of blasting annoying pop songs on a long drive. One apprentice hums now, a monotone thread that makes your eyelids twitch. You resist the urge to plug your ears. Historians still argue whether voyages were strictly disciplined or loosely communal. Some accounts paint them as rigid military-like exercises with punishments for mistakes. Others describe relaxed atmospheres where jokes, stories, and songs flowed freely. Watching this canoe, you sense both. Discipline in the navigator's commands, looseness in the apprentice's whispered laughter. It's a balance. Too strict and morale cracks. Too loose and the canoe drifts. As the night deepens again, you notice how silence works. Not the awkward silence of strangers, but the comfortable hush of people who know their tasks. The swells hum, the stars crawl, and only the occasional murmur breaks the quiet. In those gaps, you almost hear your own thoughts louder than the ocean. You think about how strange it is to trust your life to memory chants and glowing dots overhead, and yet somehow you do. The apprentices trade stories between watches. One tells about an uncle who fell asleep on his star watch and dreamed he was paddling a canoe of turtles. When he woke, he drifted off course, but his dream gave the crew a laugh for years. Everyone chuckles at the retelling, joke too of the night, proof that mistakes become legends once survived. Food comes again, this time a bit of taro mashed with coconut. The taste surprises you, slightly sweet, almost comforting. You sigh in relief, and one apprentice grins. At last, the guest smiles while eating. Joke 3 lands, light and warm. You feel included, no longer just the clueless outsider. Another part of routine, repairing small things constantly. A fiber lash is tightened here, a paddle adjusted there. The canoe is alive, and it demands care like a restless child. No one complains, it's simply woven into the rhythm of life at sea. You notice how fatigue is managed. When someone looks heavy-eyed, another quietly hands them water or nudges them to swap tasks. There's no shaming, just constant rotation. You think about modern workplaces with burnout and realize these voyages mastered sustainable pacing long before buzzwords. Historians still argue whether voyagers intentionally sailed in long relays, hopping from island to island, or attempted direct leaps of thousands of miles in one push. Evidence shows both. Either way, nightly routine was survival. Eat enough, drink enough, watch enough, joke enough, rest enough. The helmsman hums softly now, not a chant, but something closer to a lull. You close your eyes and feel the canoe breathing with the crew. Inhale with the paddle stroke. Exhale with the swell. It's hypnotic, but not careless. You realize the real secret of the nightly routine isn't discipline or humor. It's balance. Balance between alertness and calm, between ritual and improvisation, between memory and forgetfulness. And so the canoe continues, gliding through darkness, its crew a quiet orchestra of watches, meals, songs, and jokes. To the outside world, they're crossing unimaginable distances. To them, it's just another night, lived well enough to bring the morning closer. The thwarts, steadying your knees as the helmsman quietly announces the night's experiment. The remembered star path to a low atoll his teacher once reached on a moonless sea. The plan is simple in theory. Hold a rising star in its house until midnight, hand the job to its sibling, then keep the old swell on your quarter to cancel a cross current the elders call the sneaking hand. Simple, you think? In the same way juggling torches is simple until the fire touches your wrists. The first act goes smoothly. Your chosen star lifts like a lamp from the horizon, and the bow stays married to its house. You can almost hear last night's chant ticking off positions. Rise, climb, pass the baton. A mainstream fact drifts across the deck. In the 1970s, a canoe named Hōkūleʻa sailed from Hawaii to Tahiti without instruments, guided by a master navigator whose star knowledge confirmed what the old voyagers always claimed: memory can carry a hull over an ocean. The crew tonight honors that legacy by doing the same thing quietly, without ceremony. Wind freshens. Somewhere far away, a storm has drawn breath, and the swell's older rhythm begins to wear a newer ripple like a shawl. The helmsman calls for a tiny feathering of the paddle. You oblige, though your feather is closer to a chicken flapping than a swan's grace. An apprentice bites a grin and murmurs, "Careful, or we'll fly," which lands as joke 1, light as the spray flicking your cheek. Clouds form a slow-motion curtain the way they always do when you're feeling confident. The star blurs, then smudges out. No panic. The helmsman slides you to the sibling star farther left. Same house, similar bearing. For 5 steady minutes, the canoe holds line on swell alone, the hull reading that deeper thump you learn to feel back in the long hours before dawn. Memory meets muscle, the course stays true. Then the ocean tries misdirection. A set of steeper cross waves nips the bow, pushing you a hair off line. The helmsman hums and asks an apprentice for the drift allowance. How many paddle strokes, at what angle, to crab back onto the invisible corridor. The boy answers with the confidence of someone who has drawn this math in sand 100 times. You adjust, feeling a small, satisfying click as the swell settles under you again. You think of resetting a temperamental Wi-Fi router, off, on, connection restored, and immediately earn a soft chuckle from the nearest apprentice when you whisper it. Joke 2, modern life bobbing beside a very old method. The cloud thins and your steering family returns. You take the hand off, but now the ocean adds another test. Smell. A breeze slips across the deck with a faint sweetness you can't name. The apprentices sniff in unison. One says quietly, "Land wind," and your mind scrambles for an explanation. A quirk of tidbit surfaces. Experienced navigators describe catching the scent of vegetation, damp soil, or seabird colonies long before sunrise, when the wind blows off an island. You inhale again, hopeful, and get salt, mostly. It takes practice, the helmsman smiles, which is his kind way of saying your nose is currently decorative. Historians still argue whether such sense reports, smelling land, hearing surf for many miles, tasting freshwater lenses near atolls after heavy rain, were widespread practical tools or occasional embellishments that later storytellers polished. The crew shrugs at the debate by doing the one thing debates never do. They test. They hold course on the remembered line and wait for a second sign. It arrives in sound. Between the hush of wind and the soft slap of water on wood, you begin to hear a distant, even hush boom that repeats with the patience of geology. Surf on a reef? Or your imagination trying to be helpful? The helmsman cocks his head, and an apprentice nods at the dark. They make no announcement. Confirmation is a fragile thing. You let it land by itself. The cloud returns with mischief, hiding both steering stars and the Southern Cross. Redundancy steps in again. Sunrise is still hours away, but the moon slides free, silver in the lanes of chop. The helmsman uses the moon's path along the ecliptic to hold a rough heading and asks you to recite the sequence of houses you'll need when the eastern sky brightens. You fumble the fourth name and feel the canoe's future wobble inside your chest. He taps the thwart again. You get it right. The hull seems to approve. A thin, teasing break opens in the cloud, and a bright star peeks through like an eye at a curtain. You catch it in its house and sense the boat settle as the line tightens. The apprentices, busy with a lash, let their voices ride the chant back into measure. Someone slips in a goofy line about a lazy pig star, your old friend from earlier nights, and the deck smiles. Joke 3 arrives on schedule, a reminder that humor keeps hands warm while memory keeps the bow honest. Now the test turns sharp. The helmsman asks for a bold minute-long hold to starboard to counter the sneaking hand of current he suspects. This is trust fall territory. You aim away from certainty for 60 slow seconds. 1, 2, 3, counted under breath, while the unseen set tries to undo you. At 60, he calls home, and you feather back. It feels wrong until the swell slips into that familiar groove again. Correction made, corridor recovered, doubt recedes like a shy wave. dawn leans its pink shoulder on the east, and with it comes a geometric gift, the sun's rising point. You hold the remembered house where it should appear on this season's calendar, and when the first blade of light cuts the water, it does so precisely where the chant promised. That moment nudges your breath out in a laugh. Dead reckoning is suddenly very alive. A low band of cloud refuses to budge above the western rim. Underneath it, birds begin their commuter flights. The line between belief and proof narrows to the width of the canoe. A mainstream fact returns to seal the lesson. Traditional wayfinders sometimes used latitude sailing, pairing east-west movement with zenith stars that mark the latitude of their destination, keeping the canoe on a star's invisible belt, then running down to the island with birds and clouds as guides. Your helmsman didn't say the phrase, but he just did the practice. The sequence you memorize now looks like geometry laid gently on water. You notice how no one declares success out loud. There is no drum roll, no pointing, no, "We did it." The crew just moves with a looser shoulder, boils water in a battered pot, and shares taro. The helmsman offers you a sip and raises an eyebrow as if to ask, "Do you taste land yet?" You grin and say, "Mostly optimism." He accepts that answer. Cloud breaks widen. The island shows itself the way shy places do, first as a thickening in the light, then as a line where the sea changes color, then as the faint grid of green against the sky. The atoll surf speaks louder now, not a rumor, but a statement. You feel an odd calm, like finishing a puzzle and discovering no pieces are missing. The remembered star path has survived contact with wind, cloud, and current. It bent, it flexed, it asked for patience, but it held. Historians still argue whether ancient landfalls were always this clean, or whether communities quietly erased the messy failures from memory, polishing the stories until only triumph remained. On this canoe, the apprentices keep both truths. The method works, and it demands humility. In their future retellings, tonight will include the cloud, the drift, the course correction, and the tiny grin that appeared when the sun rose exactly where the song said it would. You trail your fingers through the water and resist the impulse to ask the plankton for directions one more time. They've done enough. So have the stars. So has your bone-deep sense of that older swell. As the canoe eases closer to the long white line of reef, you realize that testing wasn't about proving the sky right. It was about proving you could keep listening when it went quiet. The island fades behind you, and the canoe sails on into another stretch of endless blue. But the calm you felt up to now begins to unravel because you start hearing whispers of another force that once changed everything. Not storms, not hunger, but men carrying compasses and charts. The helmsman doesn't name them directly at first, but the apprentices do. Western sailors with their steel instruments and their need to redraw the map of the Pacific. You sense the shift in history, the arrival of colonial contact that reshaped how navigation was seen, taught, and in many cases, suppressed. A mainstream fact drifts in. When European explorers reached the Pacific in the 16th through 18th centuries, they often dismissed islanders' long-distance voyages as accidents of drift. Despite evidence of planned settlement across thousands of miles, European observers clung to the belief that primitive people couldn't possibly cross oceans deliberately. It's staggering, because you've just sat through star chants and swell lessons that prove otherwise. And yet, their skepticism carried weight. slowly undermining oral traditions. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some missionaries recorded with mild shock that Polynesian sailors refused to use European compasses when offered, claiming the needle was blind compared to the sky. They trusted their bones more than iron. Imagine a canoe crew politely handing back a compass saying, "Thanks, but we already have the deluxe version. Comes with stars, waves, and jokes included." Historians still argue whether Western contact killed these traditions directly, by forbidding them, or indirectly, by simply making them obsolete. Was it suppression, or just the slow creep of practicality? Either way, the result was the same. By the 19th century, many chants and star paths were fading, replaced by European charts and sextants. You picture apprentices once like the ones beside you, now told to memorize latitude and longitude instead of star families. The helmsman grows quiet as he recalls stories passed down of chiefs and priests, warning that sacred chants should not be sung in front of colonizers. Knowledge became guarded, hidden, sometimes abandoned. You feel a pang of loss, like hearing that a library was burned, except this library lived in minds and voices. Silence itself became a form of erasure. An apprentice sighs and mutters something wry. Another translates for you. Maybe the compass needle pointed at their pride, not at the stars. Joke one, sharp but gentle, and the crew laughs under their breath. Still, fragments survived. Some families whispered verses behind closed doors, keeping memory alive even as official authorities pushed charts and Western methods. The irony? Those same charts often depended on Pacific Islanders' knowledge in the first place. European captains routinely recruited local pilots, relying on their eyes and chants to avoid reefs. You shake your head at the hypocrisy, dismiss the method, but use it when lives depend on it. A quirky example emerges. In the Marshall Islands, some navigators secretly kept teaching stick charts, even after colonial authorities discouraged them. They hid them like contraband, as if plotting stars was a crime. Imagine smuggling not gold or weapons, but diagrams of swells and shells. You laugh softly, and an apprentice grins. Smugglers of clouds. Joke two lands with a salty sting. Historians still debate how much knowledge was permanently lost. Some say entire star chants disappeared. Others argue that fragments lingered in disguised forms, folded into children's songs or prayers. The truth is, probably both. Much was erased, but not everything. Tonight, on this canoe, you're witnessing survival itself. The helmsman stirs a pot of food, handing out bites of breadfruit and coconut. Between chews, the apprentices joke about what Westerners must have thought when they saw canoes with no metal nails. One apprentice holds up a coconut shell dramatically, declaring it his compass. The others laugh, and Joke 3 sails out across the deck, softening the weight of history. But the truth hangs heavier. You realize that for centuries, voices were silenced, not because the system failed, but because it was forced aside. Colonizers insisted on charts, on written rules, on instruments. Oral memory was labeled superstition, unfit for the modern world. And yet here you are floating on a canoe that still listens to the same stars those colonizers once ignored. As the night deepens, you glance at the apprentices' faces. They are young, but their chants are old. Their laughter feels fresh, but their rhythm comes from ancestors who never saw a compass needle. You realize that despite centuries of suppression, the tradition isn't gone. It was simply waiting for a chance to rise again, like a star lifting back into its house. The canoe hums forward under a night sky as clear as glass, but tonight feels different. The apprentices whisper with excitement, and the helmsman lets his chant soften. You realize you're drifting into a chapter of revival, the moment when star paths thought to be lost flickered back to life. The canoe you're riding isn't just repeating old ways. It's part of a movement that began in the late 20th century, when Pacific Islanders decided their ancestors' knowledge would not stay buried. A mainstream fact steadies you. In 1976, the double-hulled canoe Hōkūleʻa sailed from Hawaii to Tahiti without modern instruments, guided by Micronesian master navigator Mau Piailug. That single voyage shocked skeptics worldwide, proving that traditional wayfinding still worked across thousands of miles. It sparked a renaissance of cultural pride, inspiring new apprentices to reclaim chants and swell reading skills that had been whispered, hidden, or almost forgotten. Here's the quirky tidbit. During the Hōkūleʻa's early voyages, some Western-trained sailors carried compasses just in case. But Mau refused to use them. He insisted on stars, swells, and birds. At one point, when asked how he knew land was near, he simply sniffed the wind and said, "I smell trees." Imagine telling a GPS engineer that your nose has better accuracy than satellites. One apprentice beside you chuckles, "Maybe our guest should try smelling stars." And everyone laughs. Joke one rises with the night breeze. The helmsman speaks of how Polynesian voyaging societies formed, gathering elders and linguists to stitch fragments of knowledge back into working traditions. Apprentices traveled between islands collecting chants, testing them at sea, piecing together memory like archaeologists with living bones. Some of the chants sounded broken, missing verses, but the rhythm was enough to revive them. The ocean became both teacher and test again. Historians still argue whether this revival recreated ancient methods perfectly or reconstructed them with modern scaffolding. Some critics say the neat star compass taught today is a simplified teaching tool. Others defend it as faithful preservation of older knowledge. But on this canoe, the debate seems irrelevant. What matters is that young people are steering by stars again, not compasses. An apprentice tells a story of how he first learned to lie flat in the hull and feel swells, trying not to laugh at the idea of his bones being an antenna. He failed the first time, then the second, then suddenly felt a pulse like a hidden drum. "The ocean is patient," he says, smiling. You nod, remembering your own attempt, and joke too writes itself. "My bones are still on factory settings." The canoe erupts in quiet laughter. The revival wasn't just academic. Canoes became classrooms, floating universities for cultural pride. In Hawaii, in the Marshalls, in Samoa, crews rebuilt boats with traditional lashings, trained under the stars, and carried chants once more. Hōkūleʻa circled the globe between 2014 and 2017, spreading the message that traditional knowledge could still guide across modern seas. You feel a swell of respect. This isn't nostalgia. It's a living science. The quirky side emerges again. Some crews added modern touches for safety, radio equipment hidden below deck, but navigators refused to peek. Tests had to be pure, or they didn't count. You grin at the stubbornness. It's like a student refusing to use the answer key, even when it's taped to the back of the exam. An apprentice leans toward you and whispers, "Maybe we should give you Google Maps to hold, but blindfolded." Joke 3 lands, sharp and sweet. Historians still debate how much of the modern revival matches exactly what ancestors did. Was every star chant resurrected authentically, or were some reconstructed with creative gaps? Scholars fuss, but the canoes glide on, proving that whether perfect or imperfect, the system works. In fact, its revival has rippled into identity, reminding Pacific peoples that their ancestors were scientists of the sea. The helmsman hums a chant, this one modern, composed to honor both Mau Piailug and the ancestors he represented. The apprentices join, and for a moment the canoe is a bridge, past, present, and future, aligned under one sky. You lean back, realizing the revival isn't about freezing knowledge in amber. It's about carrying it forward, letting young voices learn the songs, and letting stars stay in their houses where memory can always find them. As the canoe presses on, you feel grateful, not just that you're here, but that the ocean's oldest classroom is still open, still teaching, still whispering to those who dare listen. The canoe drifts on, and you feel the night folding around you like a cloak. By now you've learned swells, chants, myths, the risks of forgetting, and even the story of revival. The helmsman sits cross-legged, eyes half closed, letting the apprentices murmur their verses without correction. You sense a lesson unspoken. Memory that outlasts maps is not a list of facts, but a way of being, lived every night until it seeps into posture, into breathing, into the way you lean when a certain star rises from its house. You keep your voice low and let the chant pass through your lips, clumsy but sincere, and you realize that somewhere between the jokes about lazy pig stars and your attempts to interrogate plankton for directions, the sky has moved from spectacle to habit. The canoe drifts on, and you feel the night folding around you like a cloak. By now you've learned swells, chants, myths, the risks of forgetting, and even the story of revival. The helmsman sits cross-legged, eyes half closed, letting the apprentices murmur their verses without correction. You sense a lesson unspoken. Memory that outlasts maps is not a list of facts, but a way of being, lived every night until it seeps into posture, into breathing, into the way you lean when a certain star rises from its house. You keep your voice low and let the chant pass through your lips, clumsy but sincere, and you realize that somewhere between the jokes about lazy pig stars and your attempts to interrogate plankton for directions, the sky has moved from spectacle to habit. A mainstream fact anchors this feeling. Long before printed charts and long after batteries die, the predictable motion of stars, rising about 4 minutes earlier each night, has remained the same clock in the same heavens. That slow drift, once an abstract idea, has become the metronome inside your ears. You find yourself timing the canoe by it, the way a runner times a stride to a favorite song. And when the helmsman asks, softly, where the sun will lift its blade of light in this season, you point to the house you've memorized and feel a small steadiness arrive the way a tide does. Quiet, inevitable, and hard to argue with. Of course, your brain still likes trinkets and tools. It wants the reassurance of paper and pixels. But you've watched paper grow soggy and pixels decide they're tired. Memory is the one thing you can carry through a storm without dropping, the one instrument that can't roll off the deck. A quirky tidbit floats across the canoe. One apprentice admits he quietly greets a few star families by nickname at their first appearance. The way you might greet neighbors you pass on an evening walk. It's half play, half practice. The tiny ritual sticks the names to the moment so they won't slip later when clouds tease. He demonstrates just a breath of sound as a bright star clears the rim, and the crew smiles at the habit. You try it, whispering to a star as if it were an old friend, and although your pronunciation is probably tragic, the gesture settles into the night like a small anchor. Historians still argue whether ancient memory was scaffolded with elaborate formal mnemonics, memory palaces of beach markers, choreographed gestures, and fixed verse structures, or whether most of the work lived in embodied practice, the nightly doing that makes remembering almost automatic. Sitting here, you suspect it was both. A few polished handles for the mind to grab, and 1,000 repetitions that made those handles unnecessary. The mind learns the song. The bones learn the rhythm. The canoe learns you. You glance at the apprentices and see how the method outlasts maps by outlasting any single person. One hums while repairing a lash, repeating a star sequence under his breath as if threading it into the cordage. Another lies flat for a few breaths, feeling for the older swell under the messy chop, then sits back up with a nod. You remember how your bones were still on factory settings and smile at the upgrade? A soft laugh goes around when you mutter, firmware now at version *1.0, and an apprentice responds, just don't brick yourself, which lands as joke one, sparkly as the wake. The helmsman, who has said little for the last hour, finally speaks. He points at the horizon and tells a brief story about his own teacher, how the man once sailed into a storm that erased the sky for 2 nights, how the crew wanted to drop a modern compass into his palm just this once, and how he refused, choosing instead to hold a remembered swell at the same angle to the bow and wait for dawn. On the 3rd morning, the sun rose where his bones expected it, and the birds wrote their arrow back to land. The story is not triumphal. It's almost ordinary in tone, like a memory of boiling water. You feel its power precisely because it isn't embellished. Memory resisted the panic. Calm outlasted noise. You think of all the ways your world confuses convenience with reliability. There's a joke brewing in your head. Something about asking your phone for the constellation setting where the breadfruit star line intersects the lazy pig. But you keep it to yourself because the canoe is quiet in a way that asks for respect. The helmsman catches your eye anyway and lifts a brow. If your phone could sing, we'd make it learn the chant. You grin. Joke 2 drifts across the deck like a friendly breeze. Your thoughts turn to fragility. Paper tears. Screens crack. Oral lines can break too, but they mend in performance. Every time an apprentice sings a star sequence, he rewrites it into his day, copies it into a new brain, stamps it with a small local accent, and sends it forward. The method survives by living in many bodies at once, a chorus where one voice can rest while others carry the tune. You remember the smugglers of clouds hiding stick charts, the revival crews refusing the answer key, the way a single canoe voyage in the 1970s made skeptics hush. That continuity isn't nostalgia, it's infrastructure. The helmsman asks you to name 3 signals that would reassure you at dawn if clouds hid the last stars. You answer without thinking. The older swell under the chop, commuting birds carving a line, and a stationary cloud lingering above an island you can't yet see. He nods and adds a 4th. The taste of wind you've memorized at this latitude. You almost joke about licking the air like a food critic, but then you remember the land wind you couldn't smell and decide to practice instead. A mainstream fact glides in from the edge of memory, human brains build cognitive maps using networks that fire for location and direction, tuning themselves with repetition. You don't need a neuroscience lecture to feel that truth. Your own internal compass has stopped spinning. You know where east is even with eyes closed. You can feel it drift long before the bow admits it. Your mind is not a storage locker of facts. It is a room with windows aligned to rising stars. It dawns on you how the jokes mattered. The lazy pig star kept watchfulness light. The plankton conversations took the edge off fear. The Wi-Fi reset image helped you understand course correction without mystifying it. Humor has function. It keeps the garden of memory weeded by making you visit it often. You murmur a thanks to the crew, to your own uneven learning curve, to the night, and an apprentice taps the thwart twice as if to say, "Noted?" Then he whispers, "Tell your friends we don't need crocodile dung sunscreen, though." And the boat snickers at the throwaway callback to a myth you teased earlier. Joke 3 is gentle and a bit ridiculous, the perfect size to float in a pocket of quiet. The helmsman finally offers the definition he's been circling all night. Navigation, he says, is remembering which parts of the world move and which parts stay. The stars move in known ways. The swell moves in known ways. The canoe moves because you command it. Fear moves quicker than it should, but the island stays where it is. Your job is not to make everything still. Your job is to know the patterns so the motion we can't control doesn't erase the motion we can. You sit with that until it feels like advice for more than the ocean. Dawn lifts and the sea changes color again, pale jade near the bow, deeper blue toward the stern. The apprentices are tired in the good way, the way that comes from a night spent doing what your ancestors did. You sense, suddenly, what the phrase, memory that outlasts maps, really means. Maps tell you where someone else went. Memory tells you how to get there yourself. Maps fold. Memory breathes. Maps assume the ground stays. Memory adapts when it doesn't. You run your palm along the gunwale and realize that even when you leave this canoe, the horizon you carry will be different. You'll step into your ordinary streets and still know where east is. You'll look up from a screen and search for the first bright star as if checking in with a neighbor. You won't be a master navigator after a single night, but you will be someone who greets the sky, who listens for the older swell under the day's chop, who notices the birds that fly like arrows at dusk. That's a start. It's also a promise that the next time a map fails you, you'll remember this boat, this chant, this patient road of light that needs no ink to be real. Now the ocean smooths to a softer breath, and your shoulders loosen, and the night accepts what it always knew, that you are safe enough to rest. Let the paddle sounds drift to the back of your mind. Let the sky widen into one gentle sheet of velvet, a whole roof of quiet that asks nothing of you but breathing. You have learned enough for now. The stars will keep their houses without your help. The swell will hold its slow, even pulse, and the crew will watch while you let your thoughts unspool like a loosened line. Your eyelids grow heavier, each exhale lengthens, and each inhale returns on its own, unhurried, like waves that know the shore by heart. Far away, birds are sleeping on warm sand, clouds pause above dark islands and hardly move at all. The canoe is steady, a small cradle in an infinite room, and the room is kind. You can set down the names of stars, the angles of swells, even the jokes about lazy pigs and chatty plankton. They will be here when you wake. If any worry tugs at the edge of your attention, let it float a little farther out, just beyond the gunwale, where the water is glassy and the moonlight turns it into a path. Watch it drift until it becomes a smaller shape, and then a smaller one still, until you can't tell it from the bright flecks of night on the sea. Everything that needs doing can wait. Everything that needs remembering is held for you by a patient sky. Breathe once more, slower than before. Feel the calm widen behind your sternum, warm and settled. The horizon is a soft line now, and the stars dim to a soothing scatter, and the boat rocks with the gentlest hands. You belong to quiet. You belong to rest. The ocean will keep time until morning,